Howdy doody y'all, it's Natalie. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing my May wrap up and talking about the 10 books that I read in May. I think I had overall a pretty good reading month. I had a lot of 4s and 5s in there, and I only had, I think, like 2 books that I didn't really love. So overall, I think it was a pretty good reading month. So first up, I read Normal People by Sally Rooney. This is an adult literary fiction, and it follows our 2 main characters, Connell and Marianne. They grew up in the same small town, and Connell has always been very popular and well-liked, where Marianne has always been the very quiet, considered weird girl. However, when these 2 end up striking up a conversation, what endures is a friendship and kind of a relationship for many, many years. So this book kind of starts when they're in high school, and it spans all the way until college. And this book is pretty much like no plot, just vibes. I made it one of my goals in 2023 to read a hyped book every month, just because I tend to shy away from them because I'm afraid of disappointment since they have so much hype. So for the month of May, I chose Normal People. I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. I typically really like books where it's just vibes and no plot, but this book just felt like no purpose. These are 2 very flawed characters who are very poor at communicating, which I don't think is the issue here. I just didn't get, I guess, the big picture of what we're supposed to be taking away from this book. I read it through to the end, and I guess I just kept waiting for something monumental to happen, and nothing ever did. I definitely see how this book is relatable, especially if you're reading it as a 20-something who's just kind of drifting through their 20s and kind of trying to figure it all out, and not in a perfect way either. So I can definitely see why people like this. I just ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. I think it was okay for me. It didn't really blow me away like I was expecting it to. However, I'm not going to let this book be the reason why I don't trust hyped books. I just think that the overall message or the big picture just didn't really get through to me, and that's okay. So yeah, like I said, I can definitely see why people like this. It's just not for me. So next up, I read Never Trust a Gemini by Freya Nicole Wolf. So this is an arc that was kindly sent to me by Candlewick Press. This is a YA contemporary coming of age, kind of a romance, and it follows our main character, Kat. And Kat has a crush on her best friend, but does not reciprocate the feelings, until one day Kat meets a new girl named Morgan at school and falls head over heels for her. There's just one problem, and it's that Morgan is a Gemini, and to Kat, who's very into astrology, she's not compatible with a Gemini. So this book I really wanted to love because it has so many elements that I enjoy. It's got like that zodiac kind of witchy feel. It's YA, it's LGBT, the cover is absolutely stunning. What's there not to love? So unfortunately, I actually ended up DNFing this book at 8%. I'm not the kind of person who likes to DNF books under any circumstances. I will push myself through to the end, even if I know that I hate it, just because I like to give books a fair chance, and as a book reviewer, I want to be doing a review on the entirety of the book. However, I could not do that with this book. I hate to say this, but this is probably some of the most cringe-worthy writing that I have ever read in my entire life. So our main character, Kat, I believe is supposed to be 14, but the way it's written, they're acting much younger. Our main characters were written as though they were 8 to 10-year-old girls, and the writing also matches that age level. There's just so many made up words that the main character says, and she has these catchphrases and slogans that she says that are just so mind-numbingly stupid. And overall, this was just incredibly juvenile writing, to the point where I don't even think someone who is, you know, the target audience for this book, who's 14, 15, whatever, I think it's even too juvenile for them. I think this would have worked a lot better marketed for middle grade. I just think that the writing was really, really out of touch. And I really hate to be harsh, but YA is one of my most read age levels of books that I read, and this one just felt like it missed the mark entirely. I'm going to try to find one of her cringy catchphrases that I was talking about, because I just need you guys to hear this. So her main catchphrase that she uses, I guess in place of curse words, because teenagers don't use curse words when they're teenagers, because why would that even be a thing? She says, "gooseberries galore." So every time something inconvenient happens or she's exasperated, she says, "gooseberries," which I'm terribly sorry. That is one of the most cringeworthy things I've ever heard in my entire life. I really appreciate that the author was trying to write an LGBT book that is not trauma-centric, but in doing so, the execution came across as way too flowery and way too juvenile. So unfortunately, I DNF'd this at 8%, and and I feel horribly about it, but I just didn't like it at all. So the next book that I read is Flame in the Mist by Renee Ahdieh. This is a YA fantasy that's set in feudal Japan. This is actually a Mulan retelling, and it follows our main character Mariko. Mariko is married off at the age of 17, and on the way to her betrothed, her carriage gets overtaken by bandits. And these bandits kill everybody in her party, and she manages to survive. So then she goes on a mission to go undercover as a boy and join the ranks of these bandits to find out who ordered her murder. I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. First off, I absolutely love Mulan, so the fact that this was a Mulan retelling just made me love it even more. And it's not one of the retellings that I see often. I loved most everything about this. I loved the setting set in feudal Japan. I loved the magical, almost mythological undercurrents happening throughout the story. And I loved our main character. She was just so resilient and intelligent, and she was also willing to accept when she was out of her depth in a given situation. I absolutely love Renee Ahdieh's books. She's one of my favorite YA fantasy authors. She just nails it every time. So yeah, I really love this one. I loved the setting, I loved the characters, I loved the romance, I loved pretty much everything about this. I can't wait to continue on in this series. So the next book that I read is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. So this is a memoir, and it kind of chronicles Jennette McCurdy's life, especially amidst her fame, and how much she actually hated being in front of the camera, and kind of how her mother forced her into it. And as you can tell by the title, this is very heavily centered around her relationship with her mother, which is incredibly strained, it's abusive, it's very toxic. And it also goes in to talk about her mixed feelings about grief and relief over the death of her mother, and kind of how unraveled she became after she passed away. So I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. I think this was so well written. I think Jennette McCurdy is just absolutely hilarious and extremely cutthroat. I actually listened to the audiobook for this one, which is narrated by McCurdy herself, and I think it made it that much more harrowing to listen to. This is definitely a really heavy book, so I would say make sure you're in the right headspace before reading it. But yeah, like I said, I think this is a really powerful story, and I think in Jennette McCurdy's case, it was very necessary, as people only view her as a character from iCarly. And this kind of rips back the curtain and shows what her life was really like. And the way that she wrote this, it just kind of feels like she's FaceTiming you as a friend and telling you about what she went through. So it's a very intimate storytelling. And this is just a really powerful story of healing and grief and mother-daughter relationships. Overall, like I said, this was a 5 out of 5 star for me. I really enjoyed this. So up next, I read Pride, Prejudice, and Other Flavors by Sonali Dev. As you can tell from the title, this is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. So this is kind of a Bollywood style Pride and Prejudice retelling, and it follows our main character Trisha. She is an extremely acclaimed neurosurgeon, and she comes from a very good family in terms of societal status and wealth. However, over a mistake she made many years ago, her family kind of holds her in contempt, and now she has a hard time trusting anybody. However, a chef named DJ comes to work for her family, and it turns out that Trisha is performing neurosurgery on DJ's sister who has cancer. So whether they like it or not, their paths cross. So this book was very much like enemies to lovers, which is a trope that I always enjoy. And I think the modern setting was also just a lot of fun, and it was really fun to just look at certain elements of this book and compare it to Pride and Prejudice. I actually read the original Pride and Prejudice for the first time last month, so it's still very fresh in my mind. So it was really fun to make the similarities and differences in my head while I read it. I actually primarily read this book for 2 reasons. First off, last month was AAPI month, and secondly, I'm partaking in the Books and Lala 2023 Buzzwordathon challenge, where every month she picks a word or prompt, and then you have to read a book that fits that prompt. So last month the prompt was flavors, so it was to read a book that had any kind of ingredient in the title, like salt or lemon or honey or things like that. I actually didn't have any books that had ingredients or words like that in the title, so I ended up picking a book that has the word flavor in the title, which I know is kind of cheating, but honestly, Kayla said it herself, it's not that serious. So I ended up reading this one. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I think this was so much fun. Like I said, I absolutely love the whole enemies to lovers trope, and this was a bigger story than just a romance. Just like Pride and Prejudice, it's very family oriented, which I really enjoyed. So there was definitely a lot of different smaller plot lines going on throughout this book, but they all came together in a very cohesive way, and I just really enjoyed this. So up next, I read Summerbird Blue by Akemi Dawn Bowman. This is a YA contemporary that follows our main character Rumi, and in the beginning of the book, Rumi's family gets into a car accident and she loses her sister Leah, and Leah was her absolute best friend and they did everything together. They also wrote music together, which is something that they both really loved. So this book follows Rumi as her mother is having a hard time dealing with her grief, so she sends Rumi to stay with her aunt in Hawaii. And the story is largely centered around Rumi's grief and the different ways that we cope, and finding herself again and redefining her connection to music without Leah. So I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. I listened to this one on audiobook and I think it was very well narrated. It's definitely a hard-hitting contemporary because of all the heavy subject matter, including grief, and I just think the way that it was depicted here was done in such an eloquent way, and I also think it's very realistic. I think this is a great book to read during the summertime, especially if you're someone who likes more hard-hitting stuff and you don't always want to read about like a beach romance or something like that. Overall, I think this was a very powerful story. Like I said, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend it. So up next, I read A History of Wild Places by Shea Ernshaw. This is Ernshaw's first adult release. She is my probably top favorite author of all time, so I was really excited to read her first adult book to kind of see what she could come up with without the constraints of YA. This book definitely shared some elements of its predecessors, but it was also doing something entirely different. So I would describe this book as a mystery, kind of a thriller kind of story, and it follows our main character Travis Wren, who is something of a PI but not quite, and he goes to this secluded town in the woods called Pastoral to investigate a missing persons case for a woman named Maggie St. James. Maggie St. James wrote a lot of macabre children's books, and her going missing was a very highly speculated thing. However, as Travis is searching for Maggie in Pastoral, Travis goes missing too. So years later, our main character, Theo, who lives in Pastoral, starts finding remnants of Maggie St. James and of Travis Wren, and he finds out some things about Pastoral that make him question his loyalty to it. And then his only prerogative becomes to escape. So I ended up giving this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. I think this was so fantastic. I haven't read a lot of books that have cults in them, but I always think they're very interesting to read about. I think the writing, as usual, is just fantastic as well, and her books are overall just always very immersive. This book was a little bit slow to start, but I think that is an intentional choice because in the beginning of the book, Theo is very happy and content in Pastoral, and that kind of slowly unravels over the course of the book. So I can kind of see why she did slow serenity in the beginning. I think the only quip I had with this book and why I didn't rate it a full 5 stars is that I feel like the ending kind of got up running and then tripped and didn't get back up. I know not every ending is going to be perfect, and that's totally okay. I just kind of wanted a little bit more from the ending, and I kind of wanted more POVs from the other characters besides Theo, because there is multiple POVs in this book of different residents in Pastoral. But yeah, other than that, I absolutely loved this. The setting was just so dreary, and it was in a spooky forest, and it was a cold. Like, what more can you ask for in a spooky mystery setting? I really enjoyed this and I highly recommend it. So up next, I read The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. So this book is considered a modern classic, and I have literally never read it, even though it's been out since I was born, and it's very popular. I don't know why it took me so long to read this book because it is so incredibly short. I genuinely have no excuses for why it took me so long to read this. But anyways, this book follows our main character Charlie, who is a very quirky and introverted freshman in high school. And this book is actually told through letters that he's writing, and you don't really know who he's writing to, which kind of gives it an ambiguous feel, just as easily he could be writing to you, the reader. So this is a coming of age story, and it kind of follows Charlie as he's making some really close friends for the first time and going on new adventures that he's never gone on before, and how those things kind of made him feel alive in the, as he terms it, the prime of his life. So this book is really, really hard to explain because this is another book that's very much all vibes, no plot. But nonetheless, I still really enjoyed this. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. This book is often compared to Catcher in the Rye, and honestly, this book is what I wanted Catcher in the Rye to be. I actually hated Catcher in the Rye. I actually have a whole Write review up on my channel if you guys are curious, but I really hated Catcher in the Rye. I honestly did not see the point of it, and I thought Holden was a very terrible character with absolutely no redeeming qualities. So I think The Perks of Being a Wallflower is everything that I wanted Catcher in the Rye to be. I feel like Charlie is actually a redeemable character with good qualities, despite all his flaws. I think this is a perfect coming of age story, and I think it's very realistic, and it kind of just shows the exhilaration of being a teenager and having your whole life ahead of you and having fun with your friends and going to parties and things like that. So like I said, yeah, overall, I really enjoyed this one. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is definitely a new favorite. The next book that I read is Dragon Pearl by Yoon Ha Lee. This is a middle grade fantasy slash sci-fi book, and it follows our main character Min. Min is a Gamiho, or nine-tailed fox, and they are very ostracized in her society. So she always has to hide her powers. Then one day, an inspector comes to Min's home to tell her and her family that her brother June has gone missing in the Space Forces. And if you're wondering, the Space Forces is essentially the army of this universe. And according to the inspector, June has fled his post in search of the fabled Dragon Pearl, which would give the user the ability to create or destroy life on a planet. However, Min knows that June would never abandon his post, so she goes in search of June and ends up joining the Space Force. Undercover, of course. So I really, really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. This reminded me a lot of a side character who would be in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the animated series. And I think it was so interesting how there's so much Korean mythology interwoven throughout the magic system of this world. This was so much fun. The only thing I would say I didn't like about it that made me not rate it 5 out of 5 stars is that our main character Min kind of seems to have unlimited power, and as someone who's kind of suppressed her powers as a Gamiho her entire life because she would be ostracized otherwise, she kind of goes into the Space Forces guns blazing and seemingly has unlimited power, which I just find a little bit unrealistic. Not that magic is real in itself, but I feel like I like books where there's kind of like a limit to their power. But yeah, so that's the only thing I didn't really love about it, but other than that, it was so much fun. This was such a great adventure. I loved the main character, and I just think this was overall a lot of fun. So the last book that I read in May is Searching for Sylvie Lee by Jean Kwok. This is an adult mystery fiction, and it follows our main character Amy. And this book follows Amy going to the Netherlands to find her sister Sylvie, who seemingly disappeared after she went to go be with her dying grandmother. So this book has multiple perspectives. So first off, like I said, it follows Amy, who is looking for Sylvie. There is a perspective of Sylvie that's a couple months before she went missing and the events that lead up to her going missing. And then there is a couple of perspectives where it's their mother. I really, really loved this book. This really took me by surprise. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. I think this was just incredible. I actually listened to this one on audiobook, and I think the writing was just absolutely beautiful. I also loved the setting that was set between New York and the Netherlands, and this book discusses a lot of feeling like you're straddling different cultures, as Amy and Sylvie are Chinese and their parents are immigrants. But Sylvie, for a good chunk of her life, was raised in the Netherlands, so she feels like she's not only straddling Chinese culture, but American culture, where she lived in New York for a while, and then straddling the Netherlands culture. This book just had so many layers, and I just think it was overall just a very beautiful book. I really just loved everything about this. This is definitely one of my new favorites. This is definitely a very family-centric story, which I typically tend to really enjoy. And there's just so much tension and secrets in this family that leads to a lot of different things happening, and it was just overall a really enjoyable read. So yeah, I highly recommend this one. So those are the 10 books that I read in the month of May. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Leave a like and subscribe down below, and leave a comment and let me know what was your favorite book that you read in May. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great day. Bye!